Hi friends, welcome back. Today we are going to finish our last chapter of Flat Stanley. So you will know the story of Flat Stanley and understand why I sent you a flat Miss K. So Stanley has been on a lot of adventures so far in our book. He has traveled all the way to California through the mail. He has helped stop thieves in the art museum. And today we're going to learn about another adventure that Stanley gets to go on. So the title of chapter 5 is Arthur's Good Ideas. Remember that Arthur is Flat Stanley's brother. And so sometimes Arthur's feeling a little bit jealous of Stanley because since he's flat, he's able to do things that the rest of us can't do. But remember, Stanley has been a really great friend and brother to him by letting Arthur fly him around the neighborhood. And so we're going to learn a little bit more about what Arthur's good idea is. Chapter 5. For a while, Stanley Lambchop was a famous name. Everywhere that Stanley went, people stared and pointed at him. He could hear them whisper, "Over there, Agnes, over there. That must be Stanley Lambchop, the one who caught the sneak thieves," and things like that. But after a few weeks, the whispering and the staring stopped. People had other things to think about. Stanley didn't mind. Being famous had been fun, but enough was enough. And then came another change, and it was not a pleasant one. That means it wasn't a good one. It wasn't one that he liked. People began to laugh and make fun of him as he passed by. "Hello, super skinny," they would shout, and even ruder things about the way he looked. And how do you think that makes Stanley feel? Stanley told his parents how he felt. "It's the other kids I mostly mind," he said. "They don't like me anymore because I'm different. Flat." "Shame on them," Mrs. Lambchop said. "It is wrong to dislike people for their shapes, or their religion for that matter, or the color of their skin." "I know," Stanley said, "only maybe it's impossible for everybody to like everybody." "Perhaps," said Miss Lambchop, "but they should try." Later that night, Arthur Lambchop was woken by the sound of crying. In the darkness, he crept across the room and knelt by Stanley's bed. "Are you okay?" he said. "Go away," Stanley said. "Don't be mad at me," Arthur said. "You're still mad because I let you get tangled the day you were my kite, I guess." "Skip it, will you?" Stanley said. "I'm not mad. Go away." "Please let's be friends." Arthur couldn't help crying a little too. "Stanley, please tell me what's wrong." Stanley waited for a long time before he spoke. "The thing is," he said, "I'm just not happy anymore. I'm tired of being flat. I want to be a regular person shape again like other people. But I'll have to go on being flat forever. It makes me sick." "Oh, Stanley," Arthur said. He dried his tears on a corner of Stanley's sheet and couldn't think of anything else to say to make him feel better. "Don't talk about what I just said," Stanley told them. "I don't want our parents to worry. That would only make it worse." "You're brave," Arthur said. "You really are." He took hold of Flat Stanley's hand. The two brothers sat together in the dark, being friends. They were both still sad, but each one felt a little bit better than he had before. And then, suddenly, though he was not even trying to think, Arthur had an idea. He jumped up and turned on the light and ran to the big storage box where toys and things were kept. He began to rummage in the box. Stanley sat up in bed to watch. Arthur flung aside a football and some lead soldiers and airplane models and lots of wooden blocks, and then he said, "Aha!" He had found what he wanted, an old bicycle pump. He held it up, and Stanley and he looked at each other. "Okay," Stanley said at last, "but take it easy." "So what is Arthur going to try?" "You're going to try to blow him back up with the bicycle pump." He put the long end of the hose in his mouth and clamped his lips tightly around it so no air could escape. "Okay." Arthur began to pump. At first, nothing happened except that Stanley's cheeks bulged out a little bit. Arthur watched his hand, but there was no wiggle signal, so he pumped on. Then suddenly, Stanley began to swell. It's working, shouted Arthur, pumping away. Stanley spread his arms so the air could get around inside him more easily. He got bigger and bigger. The buttons of his pajama top burst off. Pop, pop, pop. A moment more and he was all rounded out. Head and body, arms and legs, but not his right foot. That foot stayed flat. Arthur stopped pumping. It's like trying to do the very last bit of those long balloons, he said. Maybe a shake would help. Stanley shook his right foot twice, and with a little whooshing sound, it swelled out to match the left one. There stood Stanley Lambchop as he used to be, as if he had never been flat at all. Thank you, Arthur, Stanley said. Thank you very much. The brothers were shaking hands when Mr. Lambchop strode into the room with Mrs. Lambchop right behind him. We heard you, said Mr. Lambchop, up and talking when you ought to be asleep, huh? Shame on. George, said Mrs. Lambchop, Stanley's round again. You're right, said Mr. Lambchop, noticing. Good for you, Stanley. I'm the one who did it, Arthur said. I blew him up. Everyone was terribly excited and happy, of course. Mrs. Lambchop made hot chocolate to celebrate the occasion, and several toasts were drunk to Arthur for his cleverness. When the little party was over, Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop tucked the boys back into their beds and kissed them, and then they turned out the light. Good night, they said. Good night, said Stanley and Arthur. It had been a long and tiring day. Very soon, all the Lambchops were asleep. The end. Thank you to the publishers for letting us read this book. So friends, Stanley's last adventure was that everything went back to normal. And I hope that Flat Mrs. K's last adventure is that all of us get to go back to normal and I get to see your smiling faces back at school soon. I miss you. I can't wait to see what adventures you take Mrs. K on while the real Mrs. K isn't able to be with you. I miss you. I love you. Be sweet. Have a great day.